Lu Sheng, who was sitting on the bed, tightly grabbed his wrist and started screaming. He couldn't help but panic upon seeing that his hand had developed its own consciousness. The demonic eye slowly began to emerge from Lu Sheng's palm. The demonic eye was trying to expand throughout Lu Sheng's body. It was a sensation full of explosive power, a kind of dividing line between humans and demons. Even if Lu Sheng helped the demon, it would only be able to reach up to the wrist. The rest of the body was firmly blocked by the power of the stellar immortal body, with no possibility of advancing further into other limbs. Lu Sheng decided to test this power and began moving his demonic fingers, making golden thunder appear. And not long after, a powerful energy emerged from his fingers forward, cutting everything in its path, destroying his precious room into pieces. Seeing this power, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise, leaving him speechless. He had only slightly moved his fingers, and the attack had been so sharp that it had even cut through space. With a curious gaze, Lu Sheng began to observe the demon's eye. This destructive power was terrifying, and in certain aspects was comparable to the power of an immortal star body. He could feel how in the palm of his hand there were countless cells full of destruction. He began to imagine the immortal cells and the altered cells. The altered cells were similar to the immortal cells, the difference being that the immortal cells sought extreme perfection, eternal and indestructible life. On the other hand, the altered cells followed a path of extreme destruction and infinite annihilation, both being existences that far surpassed human cellular levels. The demonic eye began staring intently at our boy. He did not lose his composure and returned the demon's gaze. For him, it was no longer surprising that exotic beasts were so powerful, but even so, the difference between both types of cells was very large. After all, immortal cells were born after billions of meticulous transformations, while on the other hand, with just half a full palm's worth of power, poison dispersed enormously, making it likely that their number of transformations didn't reach 1,000,000. At that moment, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise as he remembered something. He grabbed his wrist tightly, and his gaze was filled with emotion, causing a smile to appear on his face. If he invested all this demonic energy into a single cell, then it would allow the altered cells to transform billions of times. His mind was filled with questions since he did not know if he could generate another extreme type of cell at the same level as the immortal cell. Lu Sheng's eyes were filled with enthusiasm, and with a smile, he thought that perhaps this was the way to explore the limits of the body while conserving its normal human form. But then, something unexpected happened, and Lu Sheng's expression of happiness changed, causing him to start feeling terror. His hand little by little began to disintegrate, causing him intense pain. He turned his head towards it, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and surprised at the same time since he didn't know what was happening. Lu Sheng grabbed his wrist, and his entire hand began to disintegrate like dust, and the demonic eye slowly started to close. Just a moment ago, his hand was full of vitality, and now it had aged, died, and was withering away, something that left our boy confused. Once the demonic eye disappeared, his hand began to heal again. The vitality of immortal cells far surpassed billions of times that of normal cells, and although the altered cells could not match them either, they shouldn't have been so fleeting. Lu Sheng was somewhat confused as he did not know exactly what the reason behind this was. Lu Sheng's gaze filled with surprise and panic, remembering that there might be a rule. He began to imagine a skull and several cells. The path of altered cells did not work in this world, or rather it did not work in the living beings of this world. Once one consumed the saint's funeral, the cells inside the body became infected and necessarily suffered rapid aging and death caused by the altered cells. He began to imagine a human chained and thrown on their knees to the ground with their hands over their head. It didn't matter if the user was level 9 or 10. It didn't matter how strong their martial body was, as there was no way to resist the elimination of the rules. One could only stand imposingly watching as their cells withered and died. Lu Sheng began to gaze at the ground, and it no longer surprised him that even martial saints had been killed by this poison, and that not even their martial intentions had reacted, realizing that this actually wasn't a poison. Now our boy felt like his entire body was chained by small chains. The bottle did not contain poison, but rather an assassin by rule. Lu Sheng took the bottle out of his pocket, started observing it, and his eyes filled with confusion since he did not know how to take advantage of this thing. At that moment, he began to feel something strange in his heart, and not long after, the blood pill that was in his chest started emitting a powerful red energy. Seeing this, Lu Sheng was astonished and his mind filled with questions. He did not know why suddenly the blood pill was growing. It had such a powerful force that if it kept expanding at this rate, this was not going to end well. He filled himself with determination, opened his hand, and his body began to emit blue energy. Without wasting more time, He closed his eyes, concentrated, and placed his hand on his chest, causing the energy to begin fusing. Instead of expanding, the energy started flowing throughout his body. He opened his eyes and couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly. He extended his hands to the sides, and the blood pill began releasing all kinds of energies, giving rise to the birth of the 8th immortal cell. He began to feel a strange energy and his gaze filled with surprise, leaving him somewhat confused. He started looking to one side and thought this was strange, wondering where this energy had come from. He struck his fist against the palm of his hand and couldn't help but smile, understanding that it came from the saint's funeral, and although the alteration had been eliminated, the total energy still remained. And as the alteration disappeared, the energy naturally flowed into his body. Lu Sheng grabbed the bottle of poison, raised it in the air, and fixed his gaze on it. A single drop held such powerful energy, and with this entire bottle he could fully train using this method. The small damage it caused wasn't a problem at all since our boy's limbs regenerated instantly. Lu Sheng opened the bottle cap, causing it to start releasing a suffocating energy. Very carefully he poured another drop into his palm. And not long after, his hand transformed into a sharp demonic blade. He began to observe this and his eyes filled with curiosity. He made another cut on his palm and very carefully poured another drop of poison again. His hand transformed into a powerful golem, leaving him somewhat surprised. A while later, he made more cuts on his hand and wrist, and after pouring more drops of poison, 4 demonic eyes appeared on his hand. A few hours later, Lu Sheng completed his experiment and was now sitting with his back leaning against the bed. He had been practicing so much that his hand was dripping sweat as if it were water. Lu Sheng sighed in exhaustion. Every time an alteration occurred, it was different. Just then he could take advantage to experiment. He didn't know what would happen if a single cell altered to the extreme. But then he thought this wasn't possible since there were restrictions due to the strength of the rule. Lu Sheng began to show a confident smile, thinking that rules were made to be broken. If a rule had an effect on him, that showed that he was not strong enough yet. At the same time, somewhere else, 2 men were climbing snowy mountains. The man who was behind started gasping and told his friend that the rumors about the peak beyond Tianwai Mountain were true. The other man began to touch his glasses with his hand and with a smile mentioned that the place where they were wasn't even the true summit. In front of them, there was an even bigger mountain, and they still had a long way to go, and the summit was the authentic absolute pinnacle. The man's eyes filled with emotion, and he couldn't help but smile. His friend started looking to one side, and something caught his attention, leaving him somewhat surprised. Next to them, there were some rocks and another larger one buried in the ice with the name the God of the Immortals. The two began to observe the rock in silence, and then one of them was shocked and speechless, as this was a forbidden place for mere humans, asking if this could be one of the 3 great lords of the Dragon Kingdom. At the top of the frozen mountain, there was a temple, several guards, and another man with orange hair climbed to the summit with a coffin. The man placed his hand over his chest, lowered his head, and with a look full of fear informed his lord that they had brought the corpse of the 5th lady. The man in front asked if they knew what had been the cause of death. In the coffin was the body of Lion Su, who had strangulation marks on her neck, and the subordinate revealed that she had been murdered. Someone had broken her neck. The eyes of Lion Su's husband, the martial saint, filled with rage and fury. He placed his hands behind his back and, maintaining calmness, asked why. The subordinate put his hand near his face, approached him, and began to whisper. The fury in the husband's gaze disappeared. He turned his back on his subordinate, and with a lost look, he understood that she had made many mistakes, thinking that she truly deserved to die. The subordinate lowered his head and with a serious expression revealed that the person Lion Su was pointing at, although at that moment was thousands of kilometers away, was connected to the death, adding that no other person in the Dragon's Kingdom dared to touch Lion Su. The husband, without the slightest feeling of sadness or guilt, decided to leave the matter as it was since she was dead. The subordinate began to tremble, clenched his teeth tightly, and with an expression thirsty for revenge explained that Lion Su's death was like a slap in his face, asking if they were going to let things stay like this, knowing well that it had been the work of that bastard Lu Sheng. The husband turned around, placed his hand on his shoulder, and with a piercing voice asked him what to do now, questioning whether they should go through everything and kill Lu Sheng no matter the cost just for revenge. He told King Long that he was a level 9 martial saint, not a true god of mortals, revealing that there were rules they had to follow. Lu Sheng was now the main protege of the army, If they did anything, the army would defend him at all costs. Moreover, Lu Sheng had left no evidence of the crime. King Long, who was very angry and wanted to kill Lu Sheng, said that he understood. The martial saint brought his hand close to Lian Su's face to caress it and mentioned that it wasn't going to be easy to settle this matter either. Then he began moving his hand toward her body and made it clear that the army would pay dearly for this, having to give up some important pieces in exchange. At that moment, the martial saint's eyes filled with surprise upon noticing something. He tried to bring his hand closer to Lian Su's corpse, but then a powerful golden energy appeared, leaving his hand immobile. The martial saint was filled with determination, and without losing a second he began to exert force to touch her corpse, causing the golden energy to slowly become more powerful. Then several portals began to emerge out of nowhere behind him, but the martial saint stood firm and with a gaze full of determination, touched the body of his deceased wife. Not long after, the body of the martial saint began to disintegrate, and someone stepped out of the golden portal. Upon feeling this energy, the guards and King Long fell on their butts to the ground and were shocked to see what was in front of them. They didn't know what was happening. The golden portal grew larger and someone called Zhao Jai emerged from the portal, starting to observe Lian Su's corpse, revealing that they also had descendants. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.